Hello and welcome to Well Played. I'm your host Bluetongue from around Sydney, Australia. I'm joined by our hosts. From the Blue Mountains we have Cam. How are you, Cam?
I'm doing really well, Bluetongue. Anyone that has been listening to this podcast long enough knows that I've been working on a PhD. It's finally done. Hooray!
Hooray!
Finally completed after 5 years.
So
Uh,
what are you doing with all your free time now?
I'm presently using most of it to gear up to the semester of teaching and trying to get some freelance work done. So there's not like a whole lot of, going, I've won the Super Bowl, so I'm off to Disneyland kind of thing. But yeah, it's nice to have that not hanging over me anymore. And I'm not sort of so keen to get into, too much more academia from there. But
Yep. So you're slowly burrowing your way into the workforce. Welcome.
somewhat, it's still the uni work. Still looking for other opportunities, but it's still better than having the PhD hanging over me, like this sort of Damocles.
Awesome. All right, from the Hills District we have Harrow. How are you doing, Harrow?
Well, I'm still seething from the Ruby season finale, but on the bright side, ever since I finished my Steam, I've been playing Batman Arkham Knight again with the Season of Infamy DLC installed. It's interesting because it adds just enough new content, so when you're playing the whole game through, it changes it just enough to keep you interested, which I think is good because it's a great game and I should want to play it through again. But by the same token, I shouldn't have had to have that. This DLC should have been free because it didn't really add anything else. They should have just waited 6 months and said, "Oh, by the way, replay our awesome game because we've just added in some new content for you."
Yeah, I can see that. I guess I'm okay with the advent of this whole DLC thing. I feel like it contributes more to a game rather than just the game being released and then it's either a flop or a success.
Mm.
I'm okay with people sort of coming out with new stuff to try and fix or cover over the gaps in the game that they might have overlooked.
Yeah. No,
I mean,
no.
remember when we couldn't do that? Yeah.
Hmm.
Anyway, how are you doing, Blue?
I'm doing good, thank you. I have been having mind blanks. No, I've been playing tons of Overwatch. It's been awesome. It's a little bit frustrating. It's kind of balanced. It feels on the lower skill scale towards the defensive teams, which kind of makes offense, like slowly putting your arm through a meat grinder. But aside from that, usually investing tons of time into Blizzard games as per normal. Been planning some trips overseas and yeah, working.
Yay, working.
Yes, indeed. I got season 7 of Big Bang Theory. I've been watching that as well. How do you guys feel about Big Bang Theory? Do you feel like it is doing justice and like giving kudos to the nerd community, or do you feel like it is, a kick in the pants?
It's like a combination of A and B. I've certainly heard the criticism before that it's like the blackface of the geek community, but I really think that that's a bit OTT. I mean, it's not like geeks were ever chained up and, sold or anything like that. I think that's an oversensitive kind of complaint about it. But I guess they certainly managed to get that little bit of authenticity in there, and they've done things like appearing at Comic-Con to promote the show, and I don't know, I'm personally fine with it. I don't really get that criticism.
And it does have the Lord of the Nerds in it. It's given his stamp of approval.
And that, of course, would be Will Wheaton.
Yes, that's him. What about you, Harry? What do you reckon?
Meh, it doesn't really do it for me, the show. I never saw it. I do like the description, though, of it being nerdy blackface, because, I can see that. But yeah, when my siblings tried getting me into the show, they're going, oh, they're just making a whole bunch of pop culture references. And most of them are wrong. So at the time I was enjoying... So when this was coming out, I was actually enjoying Adventure Time more, because that's more pop culture humor, and it does it better justice, I think.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't really sunk my teeth into Adventure Time. Mrs. Bluetongue watches more of that than I do. Yeah, I find there's enough interesting characters and fun little ongoing jokes and stuff like that in Big Bang Theory to keep me interested and keep me amused on a regular basis. So We'll talk about this some other episode, I imagine.
We will have to have,
I think
an
there's enough,
episode going
easily
quicker.
enough to talk about for that whole for that show. This podcast is in the business of sharing comic books, graphic novels, movies, TV shows, computer games, board games with our listeners. For those of you who are already aware of the subjects, hopefully it can give you a deeper insight. And for those who aren't, I'm hopefully introducing you to something new that you're going to enjoy. So, let's get stuck in.
All right, our first topic is the graphic novel Watchmen, written by Alan Moore, illustrated by Dave Gibbons. Came out in 1986 at a time when all comic books were colourful. I suppose you'd call this the tail end of the Silver Age of comics, when everything was extreme and over the top and child-friendly and targeted at kids. This was a grimy, real take on what a world on the political positions of the day and what a world would look like with superheroes. The comic deals with the adventures of a group of superheroes called the Watchmen, who are investigating the murder of one of their own, named the comedian. Upon closer investigation, the death of the comedian becomes part of an increasingly sinister plot by an unknown villain. So, first question. Fictitious, well, it's obviously fictional, but how close is it to the target of displaying the darker side of the human persona?
Wow. It's a really... Let's jump in the deep end there. Let's just
go.
We're going to start off with some really light, kind of fluffy material here. So definitely looking here. So I think we should probably start this podcast off just with mention of the fact that, like with anything else, we're going to spoil Watchmen, and it's been out since 1986, people. If you haven't already dealt with it, if you haven't already seen it, it's okay. You can pause right now, you can go read it, and you can come back. That's how this whole podcast thing works. Certainly...
Just to interrupt there. Just for reference of people, if you have watched any of these following shows, then you probably will enjoy Watchmen. So if you've read Saga, sort of old school type movies that are sort of nostalgic, like Forrest Gump, it feels a little bit like that. That said, it's dark and it's heavy at times and it's pretty full on. So something like Jessica Jones isn't probably far off in terms of like a modern TV show equivalent.
Yes, don't take your children to see the fun comic book movie Watchmen.
No.
Which was a point that actually was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald in 2009, was parents were complaining about how dark this film was. So yeah, just because it has action figures, just because it has superheroes, does not mean it's for kids. And yeah, this is kind of the point of Watchmen. Look, as returning us to this whole question of the psyche, definitely they're pretty messed up characters, I think is fair enough a point to say. And definitely there's a hypocrisy there. There's, these people beat the tar out of the so-called bad guys while mutilating them, while doing all sorts of horrible things. Certainly at the core of how they justify it, there's an interesting little contradiction, kind of Alan Moore's point about the contradictions of the superhero genre. But what did you guys think on the topic?
So, is it an illustration of the dark side of the human persona? So, all of these heroes in the movies, I say heroes, verbally putting quotation marks around the word, suffer from some form of, I want to say...
You can say neuroses, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, like, something like that, where there's a major flaw in their character. A major flaw in their character. And that thing is causing them to lose touch with reality, to lose touch with their humanity, to lose touch with all number of different things that it turns out are quite important when it comes to keeping your comic book and your characters upbeat and doing the right thing. So, yeah, I think this is probably a good example of something where the characters in it are intrinsically flawed, and that, as a result, is reflected in the outcome of the actual story.
Okay, yeah, I think you two actually summed it up pretty well.
I think just another point though with these characters, and I'm sure that we'll talk about this a little bit more later as well, but they're not very nice people. They are very flawed. They're kind of taken from like DC. The history here is that DC got the rights to the Charlton Comics characters, and they told Alan Moore, here, have these characters, do whatever you want with them, but then kind of thought, actually, no, we want to do something with them later. So yeah, they thought, here, use these archetypes, kind of build from there. So he's kind of playing with these old characters, and I've heard it described before as the equivalent of tuning into Peanuts and seeing Charlie Brown and Linus, and I'm trying to think of that other characters, Linus and the other twin, but seeing them basically do a line kind of thing. It's kind of like watching your favorite hero snort coke. It's kind of a dark take on these very flawed archetypes.
Yeah, the kind of thing that Family Guy does in those little sort of off to the side strips where you see like behind the scenes of something you've grown to love in your childhood. So the actual characters, am I interpreting this correctly, is that the actual characters are pre-existing? They existed before that they got brought into this story?
So as in, we didn't have like, say, Rorschach sort of, or Manhattan or any of these other characters, as much as like there were these other characters like the Steve Ditko had created a character called Mr. A, worth checking out on Wikipedia or anything like that if you want to see a very twisted kind of superhero. Basically, these kind of characters that were quite dark, quite menacing, superheroes who would beat the tar out of the villains, and they kind of are the basis for Rorschach and other kind of characters that Charlton Comics had. So he's kind of changed the names, he's twisted them, but there's plenty to kind of go by there in terms of older characters that he's looked at some of the contradictions there. I think Dr. Manhattan is one of the more interesting ones, wouldn't you say, as far as kind of the way that he loses humanity, being that kind of superpowered guy.
Yeah, he's he feels a little bit bland at times, especially when like the way he expresses himself and stuff like that. The way he's portrayed, especially in the movie, just feels tedious, which is maybe a reflection of his feelings towards humanity. But is he a character that I enjoy? In part, but I feel like it's not where I wanted that character to go.
You're actually speaking completely counter to a point I added in today. I reread and rewatched Watchmen this week, and the book does this excellent job that Comedian is vicious, that Rorschach is unhinged, that Night Owl feels ineffectual, and that something I think the movie actually does better than the book is showing Dr. Manhattan's apathy as he's moving away from humanity throughout the story. So, yeah, for me, I think that part is actually done better in the movie.
Okay. Interesting. I guess Silk Spectre might be shallow, would be almost my description for her.
See, I've thought that too, but I've also seen a lot of reviews and a lot of people that have commented on the film saying that no, Silk Spectre is does the what's her name, Malin Ackerman does a really good job, or the character is really in depth. But part of me, because I never liked the character in the book or the movie, but is that because she's been completely overshadowed by the giant personalities around her?
She did come across as somewhat, here it goes, unpleasant in the comic book. Points.
Look, the first time I read it, she came across to me as basically the equivalent of the Batgirl archetype, the teenage girl that does it for fun and kicks.
Certainly she starts off that way. Toward the end, the way that her relationship to, well, I'd say John, but really he's Dr. Manhattan in the end, has completely broken down, has become dysfunctional. To begin with in the story, when we haven't sort of had those flashbacks, and this is the other thing about this book, it really jumps around a lot. Kind of, she plays the role of the antagonist or the antagonistic wife who is losing her husband. Certainly, I think it's understandable given what she goes through with the arc of what's happening with John and her mom and how she was, I don't want to say forced into the role, but certainly took up the role with all the pressure of her mother having had this role before her. But definitely not a character I particularly liked.
Well, the mother was a piece of work. She got into it, to further her modelling career. And if that's the driving force behind pushing the daughter to get into it, yeah, you got to ask: is this coming from a good place, or any of them coming from a good place? But yeah, this doesn't make for an in-depth character.
Yeah. I wonder if that character is more she's a character that's almost created, like you were saying, by the strong personalities around her, particularly that of the comedian, which she doesn't directly deal with for the vast majority of the actual novel. But his backstory and the way that he's influenced the other characters in the story may have some or does have a massive bearing on her personality and the way that things turn out for her.
He's her father.
Yeah,
yeah, look. I mean, we said we'd spoil it, and it's been out since '86. You people have had time. Yeah.
He goes Darth Vader on her ass.
Or maybe John does. Dr. Manhattan reveals to her through a flashback sequence there. If I've got the sequence of events here, is that what happens on Mars?
Yes.
So, among many other things that happen there.
That raises an interesting point for me. Do you feel like the actual graphic novel is too disjointed by all these flashbacks that you have to go through at the start of each chapter?
I think...
No, I didn't find it disjointed. Sorry to cut you off there, Cam.
Sorry.
Sometimes the disjointedness would come at the end of a chapter, because then there would be a newspaper article or letters or a file, police file or research or something like that. And those I found would actually take it out, because the chapter take me out of it, because the chapter would be in sort of one tone, and then you'd sometimes get a pretty big shift to the big block of Alan Moore text at the end of the chapter.
Yeah. What about you, Cam?
Oh, look, I personally, I take your point there, as far as, I guess, with what Harrow is saying, as far as those little texts, I avoided those for that reason. Because it's a huge chunk of text. Certainly, look, it's not a light read. It's not meant to be. Alan Moore said that he wanted this to be similar to Moby Dick in terms of being a literary classic, being a comic that actually had that kind of weight to it. So Watchmen was originally released as 12 individual, I think it was bi-monthly issues, or certainly it released once every 2 months.
That's what they tried to do.
That's what they did. Once they did that, they then collected it into that single volume, and that was like, in some ways, I don't want to say the first graphic novel. I'm sure I'm wrong to say the first graphic novel, but one of the first that you found in bookstores and available like that. They tried to sell it as a weighty kind of piece. And yeah, look, I don't know. I certainly would not have enjoyed collecting the individual issues of this. It's one of the few times I would say that a series that works better as a unified whole as a graphic novel. But yeah, definitely a dense read. I enjoyed it for that, but certainly reading it the first time over for me was a complete blur. I first read this in 2008. The movie had been announced. What about you guys? When you first read this one, did you find your heads were completely swimming as well, or am I just the one stupid reader?
No, that's absolutely true. And it kind of, that's why I wanted to ask the question about this. Is it too disjointed? Is there too many separators in this novel? In that I found it really difficult to follow and remain focused on the actual story when I'm looking at all these other pieces of material as I'm trying to establish what's happening to the characters.
Honestly, I didn't struggle with it, but that's just me.
Yeah. So it's certainly not a light read by any stretch of the imagination, and it almost feels like, just to draw comparisons, if Saga, for instance, was David Eddings or that sort of author, then this novel feels like Sarah Douglas or Battle Axe or like J.R. Tolkien or something like that. Something really dense that requires constant concentration to actually fully appreciate.
I can see that as far as the Tolkien comparison there. And they did say, and this was their intention all along, was they wanted this to be something that you'd have to read multiple times over and kind of demonstrate that comic books can do this, that comic books can be that genre that can demonstrate that type of depth, that type of weight. But whether that's at the expense of it being a coherent read, certainly the first time around it wasn't for me. But I've read it maybe 3 times since it was an off-putting read the first time, I guess.
Yeah. So here's an interesting question. What do you guys think is the correct way to actually take in this? Should you read the graphic novel first? Should you go and watch the movie first? Just for an everyday reader or like an everyday movie watcher?
Read it, but read the book first. Always read the book first. But don't read this as your light reading before you want to go to bed, when you're just waiting to get drowsy. When I read this thing, I like to wake up, have my breakfast, and then knock out 3 chapters. That's how you read it.
Yeah. Like I tried reading this on the train a few times, and I really struggled to stay focused on it and to stay engaged with the story and that sort of thing, with all these outside distractions floating around and that sort of thing. It's a bit just too dense. It's not easy enough reading for that sort of context, and in that context.
So you could almost say it's like studying, not something you can do effectively while on the train or while tired.
Yeah, very true.
I personally sat through and read this in one sitting, and the first time I read it, which I don't really recommend. It was a complete blur after that.
I was gonna say, did your ears bleed?
Oh no, sorry, I my ears didn't bleed. My eyes might have been another thing.
My cornea's melted. Oh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Like anyone that's played Guitar Hero might know what this experience is like, but when you don't blink enough and you feel like everything is melting, because playing Guitar Hero, you have to keep your eyes out for those shiny things that you have to press in time with. For some reason, with Watchmen, I had that experience after sitting through several hours of reading this thing, but.
Yeah. So the reason why I raised that question before about what order to read it in is that I feel like the density of the graphic novel might turn people off this story without having like a better appreciation of the story and the context and the visual presentation of it that the movie brings. So a lot of people will want the light version. They want Watchmen light.
Exactly light either.
That's true, but you just have to sit back and take it in. It's all the critical parts are there.
Yeah. Maybe.
So there is some argument to approaching it from that direction.
If you're looking at this purely in terms of wanting to read the story, wanting to get that, narrative, then certainly I've heard that it's suggested before that you should not start with Watchmen itself. That before reading Watchmen, it's worth going back to those old Charlton. I'm trying to remember the name of the publisher now that DC acquired. But reading the stuff that's based on. So reading things like Mr. A, reading things like the Peacemaker, seeing what these characters were that they started with, and certainly I would suggest just tackle the thing, just read the comic book, get underway with it. But DC recently, I say recently, it was a few years ago now, but more recently did a series of prequels before Watchmen, which some people regarded as being blasphemous to actually add to Watchmen, when people say that the only canon to Watchmen is Watchmen itself. But definitely, as far as ways into the character and stuff, those are worth looking at. I don't know about first.
Yeah. That sounds like something that you'd probably appreciate more as a retrospective.
Yeah, that's just my philosophy. Always read the book first, but maybe you're someone that likes the movies first, or likes to put voices to the characters. If that's the case, maybe watch the movie first.
However, even if you do watch the movie first, you are then faced with yet another decision. So there's 3 different versions to the movie. There's the theatrical version, which you can get easily on DVD in Australia. There's director's cut, which you can get on Blu-ray in Australia. And there's the ultimate cut, which you cannot get in Australia. And the ultimate cut goes for 3 hours and 24 minutes. So I don't even know what material is in the ultimate cut that makes it particularly worthwhile. Harrow, can you enlighten me?
So you've just told the internet that I've watched a movie I'm not supposed to have seen?
Well, not necessarily. You probably travelled overseas and bought it just to have your own copy.
Yes, that is exactly what I did. Yes, Watchmen Ultimate Cut it adds in just some of those. It adds in some missing scenes, a couple of little tidbits of dialogue and interaction between the characters. But I think the big add-in is what is it? The Tale of the Black Freighter. That's also put in, and it's narrated amazingly by Gerard Butler. A really good counterpiece to the Watchmen movie itself.
Okay. Now, the Tale of the Black Freighter, what's the rough story there? And more importantly, what's the relevance to this story?
I'm not sure I should. Okay. There is no right answer. In my opinion, what the Black Freighter is about and what you take from it is entirely up to you. Smarter people than me have taken different stuff away from the story. I've taken something completely different from it. I think if the three of us were to say what it's about and what they took away, it would probably be a different answer each time.
On a more literal level, like just to give some people a ways in, I guess it might be worth starting off with what some of those plot details are with what happens in the Black Freighter.
Okay, plot-wise, ship's captain, the ship is destroyed by a pirate ship called the Black Freighter. The captain is the sole survivor, gets marooned, slowly going nuts, and then has to make his way home where he believes the Black Freighter is heading to try and protect his family, but along the way he snaps. See, to speak to my point, when I'm reading this, what I'm taking away from the story is those that fight monsters must be careful that they don't become monsters, or when you chase after a goal, when you attain it, you risk changing it, or it's not the same as when you started out. That's what it means to me. What does Black Freighter mean to you guys?
I'm interpreting it as, if you want to be a hero, then the path to becoming that may well result in your personality being broken as well. So if you want to actually become the person or become the savior, then there is like a price to pay for that.
Brilliant. Cam, prove my point.
What I took was that on another level, that it served as a counterpoint to what was happening in the world around. So comic books in the Watchmen world would not exist as we know them today, because why would you have necessarily, things about superheroes if superheroes are a thing in the world that you're a part of? So comic books instead look at things like pirates and things that do not exist so much in that world. So it has a bit of a shift like that. And yeah, it's kind of, while certain things are happening in the world around the person who is reading the Black Freighter, certain things are happening in that book, and as things get more intense, as things get crazier in the Black Freighter, so too does Watchmen move on. It was a counterpoint to the main narrative, I guess. But yeah, certainly this has been the most sort of concise explanation I've seen for the Black Freighter. Definitely, it makes even less sense than the main narrative of Watchmen, were that possible. Look, Alan Moore is a dense writer, and certainly if you read another one, if you like Watchmen, a great other thing to attempt to read is his take on Miracle Man, which Marvel have been republishing. But that's actually more dense and more violent and more off-putting than Watchmen. So,
wow, how is that even possible?
Oh, it's entirely possible.
Longer form storytelling,
and certainly the violence is on another scale, and one issue I can barely describe, but involved.
Are we talking like Game of Thrones style?
Worse. No. I mean, this one villain goes through London and decides that he might.
How do you get the superhero's attention?
Yeah, he wants the superhero's attention. He wants that. How do you do that? You rip people's skin off their bones, and you take children's eyes out, like pluck them out of their head, and you put people on spikes. It's revolting.
That does feel like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Or the Mongols. Is it the Mongols?
Sorry?
It does feel like Game of Thrones. Or the Mongols. Is it the Mongols?
It's worse. I think the one that got me was the breast checkerboard. He just ripped off boobs and made a checkerboard from black and white chicks because he thought it would be funny. And and he heat visioned people's arms and legs off to watch them thrash, and it's pretty full on.
It looks like
Wow.
a vision of hell, but
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
So a real, actual villain, like
Yeah.
not just someone with some elaborate, semi-nefarious plan. This is really, really bad.
This is
Yeah.
this is a psychopath wanting the attention of a god. So yes. On a lighter subject,
now
Watchmen.
that
Yeah.
now that we have traumatized our
This is positively like bunny rabbits and fairy floss. Okay. So, how do you guys feel about the characters portrayed in the comic versus the movie? So, do you feel like the movie characters have done them justice, or do you feel like that they might have missed the mark in the way that they were portrayed?
I think the movie characters do an excellent job. You can tell just how intense Rorschach is. The guy's played amazingly, and I didn't write the actor's name down, but yep, shake his hand, give him an award of some description. The guy that played Dan Dryberg, you could feel just how powerless he felt in some of those scenes. I said earlier that I think the movie did a better job with Dr. Manhattan showing his apathy as opposed to the book, and Silk Spectre was just kind of there.
The actor who played Rorschach is Jackie Earl Haley.
Cool. Did he win an award? He should have won an award.
He should win the Rorschach Award.
The Rorschach Award. The Rory. The Rory.
Raw, yeah.
It's just a series of ink blots. It's amazing.
Cam, I know you think the movie's kind of pointless, but how do you think the characters did?
I thought that, it's not the fault of the actors and certainly not the fault of the characters as far as portrayal or anything like that goes. It's kind of, one thing I would say about the movie in its favor is not so much the individual performances as much as that opening scene, which was set to The Times They Are Changing by Bob Dylan.
Yep.
So
That
good.
scene alone almost makes this film worthwhile. And
Oh,
almost,
It is really good.
almost by itself. If you were to see that film, and I'm not saying go and watch it and then switch it off after that opening bit, but if you did, I wouldn't blame you. Yeah.
If you watch that and then didn't actually want to continue watching it, there's something wrong. However, the introduction is much easier to appreciate after you've read the novel and know the context about where the story is going and who's involved in each of these scenes that are being portrayed.
particularly those massive blocks of text at the end of the chapters. That's what the introduction does well. In a few scenes, condensing, some of that Alan Moore info dump.
Yeah.
I think that we should coin that as a phrase, Alan Moore info dump.
Yeah.
There are other authors that sort of try that sort of thing, not so much in comic books, but in books. Stephen King does it a lot. There'll be a little poem at the beginning of a chapter or a newspaper clipping or something else to give you some information or set some tone. But yeah, definitely Alan Moore likes his info drops. Yeah, I thought that, you're right. It does set it up nicely as a film and shows you the world in, I think it's less than 5 minutes. It's certainly not a very long part of the film, but it's not a
It
pleasant...
gives you a lot of historical context
Yeah.
in that short period of time. It quickly establishes that this isn't the same reality that we're living in, and it's not pretending to be that.
And that superheroes aren't, yay, happy, always winning pillars of righteousness.
Yeah. I particularly, the scene that really sticks out for me is, not in terms of the superheroes and that sort of stuff, but also the world around them being really, truly despicable, is the scene with Silhouette. Well, the couple of scenes with Silhouette in them.
You mean right at the beginning?
Yeah, in that introduction sequence we're talking about.
Yeah.
Silhouette.
Yep.
Yeah, she kisses another girl in like the war is over, end of World War II
Yep.
scene.
Japan surrenders. Yep.
Yeah, and then it's followed up a couple of scenes later by her and her girlfriend having had their throats slit and lesbian whores written on the wall in blood and stuff like that.
Yeah, but again, in the Alan Moore info dump, it was just, it turned out that it wasn't even a political statement. Someone she had put away just killed them, and then they made it look like a hate crime to try and misdirect the cops.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Again, brings me back to my point. You can appreciate this a lot more once you've actually read the graphic novel in detail.
But yeah, I mean, I'd still found that scene, something about And this is one of the few times that I think the movie accomplished something that was not already accomplished by the book, which was you got that soundtrack to the times they, the times that they're changing it. It had that soundtrack to what you saw, and Bob Dylan's music works very well in almost any setting, but especially well here.
Yeah. Can I just also give kudos to the actual person who chose the music for this movie? It's
yeah.
so good. Like,
Yeah.
so there's the Bob Dylan track. You've got Jimi Hendrix. You've got Nat King Cole, Simon and Garfunkel, and Leonard Cohen. And those are just huge names in music and really good musical circumstance for this movie. It's really, really well done.
I managed to score the soundtrack in an op shop a few weeks ago for $2.
Oh,
Which worthwhile by itself, worthwhile soundtrack. And that other one was the funeral scene. I've just remembered the funeral scene where at the comedian's funeral and with some other cuts interspersed, they had another song that it's not coming to mind immediately.
It's Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
Which is also famously done by Jeff Buckley.
The Sounds of Silence is the one I'm thinking
yeah,
of.
that's the one.
It appears that, however, it does appear. Hallelujah does appear later in the film as well, and that's also well done. So, look,
Yeah.
I start off, saying that the film's pointless. It does have that going for it as far as excellent soundtrack and things like this of this nature.
Next point, Ozymandias, excellent villain, brilliant, well planned, but calm, collected, sort of villain I wish we had more of. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I get that. However, the villain wins in this novel.
Yeah.
Are we okay with the villain winning?
So here's the thing. Is he the villain?
Is not humanity the villain?
What I'm getting at here is that he has a plan that succeeds and creates world peace. And where you look at superheroes as a whole in this world, they are ultimately causing this escalation of violence, this kind of ongoing battle. Evil has to become more evil as it goes. Good has to become more powerful to overcome evil. And this is never ending.
They're very much agents of chaos that are
Yeah.
just being wrought upon the world kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's a cycle. It's a cycle of endless, of what gets described as the myth of redemptive violence and the ongoing kind of sort of like cycles of violence. He does a horrific act, does the villain of the piece, but that puts a stop to the violence. So, yeah, in some ways, the villain is the good guy of the piece.
I guess the answer to your question is, how much do you sympathize with Rorschach? Are you sympathetic to his perspective of face down oblivion and continue doing the right thing, or are you willing to make concessions towards the goal of world peace? What concessions are you willing to make as well?
Yeah. There's two perspectives really in this. Is Rorschach? He's the
Completely black and white, like his mask.
Entirely. He's
like the conscience of the reader, kind of.
And yet he kills people as well. He, is this deranged psychopath who threw someone down an elevator shaft because he was annoying him. He, but he is ultimately he says at the end, never compromise, and he dies never compromising. On the other hand, is just about everyone else who says, yeah, well, we have to compromise in this instance and face the reality of it.
Yeah, which is really interesting. And it just keeps raising more and more questions the more we talk about this stuff, I think.
Yeah.
See, something you were saying about the presence of these heroes leads to escalation. That lovely phrase we coined, the Alan Moore info dump.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning, it talks about mutually assured destruction. Because as soon as Manhattan comes on the scene, the Russians know they can't win, so the other option is we lose or everyone loses. And presented with those two options, his presence alone escalates world tensions. It's, another excellent way that, how would foreign powers respond if, oh, by the way, Superman lives here and he'll protect us?
Yeah, see, the point that they make in the novel is that his presence isn't actually a deterrent.
No, it's not.
It's just an escalation. So the fact that he is there and Superman is there makes no difference to the political climate. They're still playing with this whole mad, mutually assured destruction plan, which was actually a plan that they came up with for the 1950s. Oh my goodness.
But at the same point, like, I don't think it would. I mean, obviously, it sounds absolutely nuts to us today and looking back on those decades. But part of the point there was they ensured that the thinking was, I'm not saying I agree with this, but the thinking was, if we have as many weapons as they have, if we have as many weapons as one another and we act as a counterweight to each other, that will mean that neither of us will be at the button first, because no one wants the other one. You know, if no one wants to see themselves destroyed, which was assured. It's insane, and we look back on it and we see kind of the degree of insanity that we're glad no longer exists to that scale anymore. But it did mean that there were counterweights in place that the US could not. Well, it ultimately won out. Yeah, certainly the presence of superheroes on the US side in the world of Watchmen was not a positive thing, ultimately.
Yeah, it had very little bearing on that whole political situation, I feel.
Did you guys, I believe, did you guys ever read the book World War Z? Okay,
I saw the movie as well. I've got the book there and mean to read it, but
there's this interesting reason you talk about this mutually assured destruction, and and neither side wants to be the first to push the button. The book does the movie is nothing like the book. The book does this whole segment about the use of nukes against the zombies, because some of these military analysts were saying, two hostile nations, I think it was saying India and Pakistan, both countries have nukes, both countries don't like each other, and they're never ever going to use these nukes because they have direct communication with each other. They'll always have the thing like, oh, now don't do this, and then they can save face by saying, okay, well, I've spoken with this leader and we're coming to a compromise. The presence of communication is going to stop these nukes from falling, but when communication breaks down due to the zombie apocalypse, the nukes start flying pretty much. Yeah. Flying. So I like that idea about, the counterweight. If both sides have enough to destroy the world 12 times over, so neither one wants to be the one to blink.
And certainly the kind of that equation getting thrown out in Watchmen because of America, having superheroes.
America's got Manhattan. What have the Russians got? Nothing. So they're more willing to accept mutually assured destruction.
Yeah. This kind of brings me to another point, is that, it's a story where the villain does that. The villain overcomes the superheroes. He's smarter than them. He overcomes in such a violent and awful, may we even say evil way. Watchmen is a depressing read. It's not uplifting. It might not even be said to be edifying. Is it too much so? Is it too much, too dark?
Yeah, very valid question, because this book is not going to take you into a happy place. You're not going to come out of it going, oh, wow, I feel much better now. The realization and the point feels like at the end that the only thing that will bring humanity together is a disaster of cataclysmic scale.
Victory can only happen through tragedy or through loss. I like the dark story, just personally.
Yeah, I enjoy dark stories as well, as much as the next person. Maybe don't follow it up with other dark stories.
So after reading Watchmen, I suggest a good story about Peppa Pig.
One of the other excellent kind of texts that someone who's, I don't want to say influenced by Watchmen, but someone else who I'd bring up as being someone who has written very dense comics and very detailed scripts. The guy I'm talking about, Grant Morrison. He did All-Star Superman, which is a fairly dense read in and of itself, but it's sort of unapologetically hopeful in its story. And he actually was asked before, were you influenced by Watchmen or did you like it? And he said, so Watchmen, isn't that the one where I can't remember the name of the creature that they have in the Arctic. It's like an accompaniment to the main villain. He has the lynx cat thing. He's like, isn't that the one?
The lynx cat
thing. Isn't that the one where the lynx cat gets killed? Is how Grant Morrison described Watchmen. So yeah, he hated Watchmen. He thought that it was just a depressing read, and he's got a very sort of uplifting kind of read in some ways in All-Star Superman. So that's one place to start as far as your follow-up, if you like. Also recommend Astro City by Kurt Busiek, in that it takes some of the dense sort of structure, some of the different ways of looking at superheroes, but does so in such a hopeful and different way that it makes a nice counterpoint.
As a happy medium between these two, I recently finished reading Mark Waid's Irredeemable.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a dark story, but in the end, it also has a happy ending. So I don't know, maybe read Watchmen, then Irredeemable, and then work your way up to All-Star Superman.
We might want to talk about Irredeemable on a future podcast, because that one bears more talking about, especially in the wake of Watchmen.
Yeah, really it does.
If you're interested by any of the things that we've spoken about here about Watchmen, or any of the kind of underlying themes of Watchmen, and you want to see it rehashed or analyzed even more, a book of essays about Watchmen called Minutes to Midnight is worth looking up. That was one that has something like 13 essays about it and plumbs the depths a bit more than what we've got time for here, quite frankly.
Some other Alan Moore books for you if you're interested in following up on other stuff like Watchmen. Swamp Thing, Miracle Man, Killing Joke, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Superman for the Man Who Has Everything. Yeah.
Gonna say, yeah, if you like Watchmen, if you like Alan Moore stuff, Killing Joke is a much smaller but also good dark tale, and Miracle Man is also another one where you could be discussing, what would a world with superheroes and aliens really be like.
And just because Alan Moore is not always depressing, Superman, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow?
I don't know that one. Give me a brief rundown. What's that one?
Basically, they were looking to relaunch or rejig Superman with the Man of Steel. There was going to be a reboot, and they had like what they called an imaginary tale. It takes place outside of continuity, about what would the last ever Superman story be. And so it's a story about Superman has X amount of time, I think, to live. I know that's also the story of All-Star Superman, but yeah, it's an attempt at the last ever Superman story and looks at what makes this character so good.
All right, for our second topic this episode, we're going to be discussing another movie, and given that we were blending a movie with a graphic novel for the last segment, hopefully this won't be too tedious for you all. But we'll be talking about Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. So The Hateful Eight is the next in the genre of Quentin Tarantino. I'm going to call Quentin Tarantino his own genre of movie. So the movie itself, plot-wise, is set shortly after the Civil War, and it's the story of a bounty hunter named John Roth and his prisoner, Daisy Domergue, and what happens to them on the journey into the town of Red Rock, where he's intending on hanging Domergue. He essentially has her prisoner, and she is sentenced to death. It's a story of him trying to get her there. Along the way, they encounter some more characters. Major Marcus Warren, a former Union soldier turned bounty hunter, and Chris Mannix, who's a Southern renegade. So they're already going to be at odds, and who claims to be the town's new sheriff. So this movie's directed by Quentin Tarantino, as I already mentioned, and like all his other movies, is involving a huge amount of dialogue, and there is definitely no guarantee of a happy ending waiting you at the end of this movie. Like many of his movies, you have no idea what to expect. And I guess it's part of the appeal for me. You're always sort of on edge. You don't know where this movie is going to go. It doesn't have a really logical story sequence that you can really pick out prior to actually seeing the different scenes as he reveals them. So how did you guys feel about this movie? What were just your overall impressions?
Yeah, up front, I haven't seen it yet, which I'm kind of devastated about because I'm a massive fan of Quentin Tarantino, and certainly been keeping a close eye on the reviews and stuff like that. So plenty of questions I have about it.
What about you, Harrow?
I liked it more than Kill Bill, but not as much as Inglourious Bastards or Django Unchained.
What about in relative to Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction? Have you seen those?
I haven't seen Reservoir Dogs, but no, I'd say, but yeah, Pulp Fiction is definitely better.
As far as my overall feelings of this film, I feel like it is a worthy successor to all the other movies that he's done. I feel like it is living up to the themes and interesting and engaging enough with the audience and challenging for everyone without being too self-absorbed, I guess. But I'm pretty sure that opinion isn't necessarily held by a lot of critics and a lot of people who have seen it. A lot of people who have seen this feel really strongly that the movie is too long and it is a chore to actually get through it. I don't really feel that way. I think Samuel L. Jackson is really, really engaging and is the kind of person that I could watch almost indefinitely in this sort of scenario.
Yeah, is it too long? I think like the final act with the bloodbath and them killing all each other was probably a bit long. I would have loved to have seen more character tension and build up and just the tension in that room. You could cut it with a knife. You can feel it in your seat.
Yeah.
It's so good. But yeah, you probably could have trimmed the gory part of the movie down.
Yeah, to a certain degree. There's certainly a really long sequence there where one of the characters faints at like a critical point, and that kind of brings everything back into question. You know, what's going to happen next, and then other characters are like dying in turn at this point as well. It's an interesting little revisit to Reservoir Dogs if you haven't seen that with Tim Roth's character. So that was really interesting. There's a lot of full-on stuff as per Quentin Tarantino as well. He almost goes for shock value in many of his movies.
Well, that was deliberate though in the last two, but I'm not so sure about it. Didn't need to be. This one didn't need to be as shocking, I don't think.
Certainly, that's I guess people had the complaint with Django Unchained that Samuel L. Jackson's character seemed out and out racist, and certainly being a questionable thing about some of his movies. But was that off-putting at all in the case of The Hateful Eight? Like, did he go too far, or were some of these characters a bit too unlikable? Maybe?
See, part of what I've heard about this movie and the other perspectives on this is that it's an exercise in all these awful characters and these awful people coming together in one place and seeing what happens and how they interact. And it's kind of interesting in that way. So I think the way it got expressed in that particular review was that the most likable character was a woman beater and like an absolute psychopath who is single-mindedly dedicated towards like the death of someone else. So if that's your most likable character, you're gonna go downhill a long way.
Yeah.
You're gonna say if that's the most likable character, the only way you're going is down.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's true. Actually, you've blown my mind here because Inglourious Bastards, war is hell, Nazis bad. That's supposed to be shocking. Django Unchained about Southern slavery, that is supposed to be shocking and in your face. And I'm thinking that this one was too gratuitous. It didn't need to be as full on as it was, but the way you describe it, when you've got this many bad people, how else can it
This
go?
is always going to happen. Now, what I find a little bit confusing, and it would probably pay to have an American host for this episode, is that there is like correlations between this movie and American history, and well, obviously direct correlations between this movie and American history, but in that it's somewhat of an expression, a veiled expression of the current political tensions and racial tensions that are still plaguing the United States at the moment. Do you guys feel like that it's well expressed, especially from a foreign point of view?
I honestly couldn't answer that. I don't know.
Yes,
I will say though that what's his name, Mannix, the sheriff. Yeah. His whole thing about being a lost causer. I thought that was actually pretty interesting. What a lost causer was. How does the losing side respond after a civil war? That I found quite interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if does it go to the effectiveness of the film in engaging the history of America that we as outside audiences may have problems understanding that. Like, if the themes were clearer, perhaps we could, or do you think it's something that you have to be American to get as far as where content
I think
goes?
you certainly appreciate it more with a stronger knowledge of like American history and the Civil War and all these other sort of tensions that are already pre-existing in the story, and then are just brought to a head by these really huge characters that are pitted against one another in this scenario.
So yes, the point is we're not American. Can't really answer that.
It doesn't really shine through for people who are not American, I'm sorry to say, for the American listeners. And we're not going to be able to talk about all the different ways that different characters express political perspective and stuff like that. Yes, it's clear which sort of sides fall in the North and the South, but at the same time, yeah, it requires a more intrinsic knowledge of American history, I'm afraid. So that's a little bit lost on the international audience, alas. All right. So now there's one interesting. I listened to an interview between Quentin Tarantino and some Australian radio stations, and he was talking about the way that they've done the movie and the way they've designed it. And I don't know if you got this, Harrow. During the middle of the movie, there's actually an intermission. Did you actually get that in the cinema? Did the cinema actually stop the movie for you?
No.
Mine didn't either.
My understanding was that they only stopped the movie, and you only got the interlude or the intermission part if you saw the film in the format it was meant, like he originally intended for you to see it in, which was the 70mm, I want to say, format. Like it's an old school format that only a couple of cinemas in Australia are capable of still showing. And yeah, during those, that when you saw it on that particular format, you got not only that intermission, but a couple of extra minutes of footage that are otherwise absent.
I saw it at the local cinemas in just one of their smaller screens. But even then, I was right up the back, and they were using like the entire width of the screen. I don't think it was the full 70mm, but yeah, it was a wide screen presentation.
Yeah, so that was 70mm was the kind of format that he used, and yes, it was something that not all cinemas had. There were maybe a handful in Australia that were capable of showing.
I actually got really excited about the potential to have an interlude in the actual movie. Sorry, an intermission. And I actually got really disappointed when we didn't get it. So we got about halfway through the movie. I'm like, okay, I think this is about the right... And then it just kept going. I was really looking forward to it. And so the idea that he had...
Cinemas aren't going to do that.
No, of course not. It's going to cut into their, It totally makes sense from even a cinema perspective. You put an intermission in the middle of a massively long movie. People are running out of food and they want more ice cream and they want new drinks and stuff like that. They go out and buy a whole bunch of more merchandise. It's great.
So I remember that like 2 cinemas I've been to in my life have done this. And it was when I was a kid. It was when I was a child that they did it. But there were 2 cinemas. Glenbrook Cinema did that a couple times. They'd have an intermission, and one in Lithgow, I want to say, that I went to as a kid, they had a little cinema there that did an intermission. And so, yeah, it's not something that's done nowadays, but definitely it's an old school kind of cinematic tradition that why not bring it back, I say.
It makes sense from a financial perspective, and it makes sense from like a give the audience a break perspective and let them talk about what they're watching.
I would rather that they had an intermission and cut out so many more of the ads that you see before the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to sell that at all to the audience, but I guess they're the money makers from the cinema perspective.
Yeah, ads and selling popcorn and drinks is how cinemas make their money, not actual ticket prices. Would an intermission have worked with this movie? Probably, because, after the whole poisoning thing and that whole build-up of tension, we then skip to the flashback. If we did the whole build-up of tension and then have intermission and then get to the flashback, would that make the flashback, would it make the film flow better? I know it sounds like a contradiction, but as opposed to like the big 2 changes in tone, because the problem was, I found that as they had this massive build-up in tension and then they skipped to the flashback, I'm like, no, get this flashback over with. Get me back to the good part. What is this rubbish? So I'm not sure how an intermission in this particular context is going to work out, because it goes tension, 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 intermission. I'd be shaking my fist going, oh, you got to be kidding me. But by the same token, if you give your mind a break, if you catch your breath, maybe you are going to appreciate that flashback more.
I think the most interesting part about having that intermission in there would be the fact that this is essentially a mystery film. You don't know what's happening. You're left with many more questions through the opening sequence than you have answers. So I feel like the intermission would work, especially in the context of it being a mystery film. You're left with a lot of questions about who the characters are. There's flaws in the stories that are presented by some of the characters, and it makes it there's a lot of questions that you're asking, and it's the kind of thing you want to talk about with the people that you've gone to the movies with. So
that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, like I think there's a really good place for it, and I really regret that the cinemas, the Hoyts that I went to see that didn't actually put that in.
What was the last movie you saw? I'm going to assume Deadpool. Everyone's seen Deadpool this weekend.
Yeah.
How would you have liked it if, because that's another movie that jumps forwards and backwards, how would you have liked it, at a point that said, and now intermission?
Yeah.
Would that have worked for you?
No, I don't want it in every movie. I just thought that this one, that especially had been designed with an intermission in mind, would have really worked well. I don't want there to be an intermission in the middle of Avengers or something like that. I'm like, no, give me more action sequences. It's like, I totally get it, but in this context, it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I'd agree. So cinemas don't bring back intermission, but this movie's probably an exception to the rule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe for something that you actually have to think about that requires a kind of a thinking break. Maybe something more like the Watchmen film or something like that.
That movie legitimately needs a intermission.
Yeah. And maybe if you watched Game of Thrones from end to end, you'd probably need some good intermissions there.
Bless your soul. Yeah. On a lighter note, you guys know about the guitar in the movie. Did you guys hear about what happened to the guitar in the movie?
No.
When they were filming the movie, Quentin Tarantino went to this guitar museum to get an authentic guitar from the time period.
Oh my goodness!
And they were supposed to switch it out, and they didn't. So
oh my goodness!
Snatches this relic from Daisy Donahue and smashes it around over her head. Her reaction is legit. She's not acting at this point. Like, he's just destroyed an heirloom in front of me.
Oh my goodness!
So yes, the museum doesn't lend out guitars anymore.
Oh wow!
I'm sure Tarantino's got the money to sort of stipend that, but it's still not appreciated.
I wonder how much it was worth. Like,
yeah, the article I read didn't say.
Oh wow! Yeah,
he's probably paid them off, and there's a non-disclosure agreement or something.
There couldn't have been a non-disclosure I wouldn't have been able to read about. Yeah,
but I'm sure he paid them off.
Yeah,
yeah, he would have. I think the article said the insurance covered it.
Yeah, wow. The other really funny story that I heard from Quentin Tarantino about this is the the introduction with the horses running across the mountain range.
Yep.
Yeah, so the first time they filmed that, they were waiting and waiting and waiting. So they needed everything to be right. They needed the snow there. They needed, like, the right lighting. They needed all this other stuff. And they finally got it all after weeks of waiting. And they're like, okay, now hitch up the horses and we're going to start running. And they're running and they're running and they're running. And the horses just ran out of steam and they just started walking. And they're like, no! So they quickly, frantically got the horses, and they couldn't just take them back the same way, because then it looks like the
snow's already been traveled.
Yeah, exactly. So they had to load them up onto trailers, drive them back around to the start, bring everything else back around to the start while it's still snowing, and then rehook the horses up and refilm it. It's just like, oh man.
Gotta love the attention to detail.
Not normally want to suggest such things, but they say don't work with kids or animals, right? So I would just CGI that,
Yeah, I don't think that was quite in the vein of this movie. There's not a whole heaps of like CGI and effects and stuff like that. But that was just hilarious, I thought. It's just, man, it gives you a new appreciation of filmmakers and the amount of effort that goes into the kind of stuff they produce.
So I guess you guys have seen this film. I haven't seen this film yet. Where does it fit in Tarantino's catalog? You've said before, better, worse than. If you'd have rank it, I guess.
Okay, so let's just go through his other movies. So we've got Pulp Fiction. I'm not rating this as highly as Pulp Fiction. I really enjoyed Pulp Fiction, and it was a really groundbreaking movie. I'm the only one that's seen Reservoir. Oh, John, have you seen?
No, I haven't seen Reservoir Dogs. Yeah.
With Reservoir Dogs, I'd say it feels. I'd say almost on par. It feels kind of similar in a lot of ways. Just being the context, if nothing else, in that Reservoir Dogs is basically a singular set with a few flashbacks throughout the movie. So there's a lot of similarities there. Kill Bill, oh gee, I don't know if it doesn't compare well to Kill Bill because that one's all about the actual story and the characters, and there's like set over 2 movies, and they're just doing different things in Kill Bill. Whereas this one's more of there's a distinct element of mystery to it, whereas Kill Bills are pretty straightforward. This is what I'm planning on doing, and this is how it happened. I get Django Unchained. What do you reckon, Harrow?
Well, I'd say Hateful Eight. In my opinion, I prefer Hateful Eight over Kill Bill. But yeah, Django Unchained is miles ahead of this, of Hateful Eight.
Yeah. Django feels like it has a lot stronger character, and you feel a lot more for the characters in that movie. And I guess
these guys are slavers, so the gratuitous violence actually is, you don't mind it as much.
Yeah. This one feels a lot more. Yeah, there's no heroes in this movie. Like zero heroes. There's like, you know, the Watchmen, how we're talking about with their bad flaws and stuff like that, and how they eventually turn, like, are they turning into villains themselves? These guys are all already villains. There are no heroes to start with. Yeah, so, and comparatively speaking, Django, you're watching Django's character and the dentist character, who you both feel really strongly positively for, and then everyone else you feel fairly negative towards. Whereas this one you just feel moderately negative, like it's levels of negativity towards each character.
So what about Inglourious Bastards then? How would you compare it to that?
Oh, gee. Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Bastards is just...
I know!
It's such a strong performance.
Imagine if he was given that level of material in Skyfall, if he could be the Bond villain.
Yeah.
Spectre.
With that level of material. Spectre, sorry, yeah.
Just to, like, relive some of our old episodes for the for the audience. Yeah, Inglourious Bastards, I think this feels slightly better, to be honest. I didn't feel like Inglourious Bastards tied up everything in the way that I wanted it to, whereas Hateful Eight tied up everything pretty neatly and gave you a good solid conclusion to the story.
I'm going to say I preferred Inglourious Bastards over this. Okay, and you're saying the Hateful Eight, you prefer the Hateful Eight ending?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Inglourious Bastards felt a little, almost contrived. Like, it became a fantasy movie for me at that point, and I was like, I don't want to watch a fantasy. I want to watch, like, a take on the historical facts kind of thing. I would have actually wanted to see them fail, I think.
Okay. See, I recently watched Fury. I forget the guy. What's David Ayer, I think the guy's name is? And I didn't particularly like that movie. I'm watching the whole thing and going, everyone here is trying too hard to win Oscars. And yeah, that was more historically accurate than, say, Inglourious Bastards were. But yeah, this move, Fury was gratuitous because it was trying to, I think it was just a try-hard movie. And Inglourious Bastards is gratuitous because this is the Tarantino style and it works.
I really liked Fury, personally. I didn't feel like it was too contrived or that they were putting too much effort into the scenes. I felt like they're trying to deal with a lot of heavy things. And it's something that a lot of war movies tend to struggle with, in that they deal with a lot of really heavy and deep concepts. And so in that extent, it feels like it's not something that your everyday person's going to be able to truly appreciate, I think.
So, in my opinion, the four tanks versus the tiger, that was awesome. Everything else I found a bit contrived. And in Glorious Bastards, you're saying you found the ending too contrived, but like the beginning.
Absolutely. I liked the characters and the narrative, and the really interesting, exciting, put you on the edge of your seats right from the word go kind of way it was presented.
Oh, the dialogue of Inglourious Bastards.
It's fantastic.
Oh.
I'd say that the script for Inglourious Bastards was probably much better than this, but the actual plot itself was probably stronger in this movie.
Anything else we want to add besides Jennifer Jason Leigh was amazing and needs to win all the awards?
I'll tell you, what about this? Did you feel like the eventual collaboration of the Major Marcos Warren and Chris Mannix characters was valid? Was it something that you felt like was really what's the word? Yeah.
Believable? Crikey. They're both lightheaded. Well, if they were both, healthy and of sound mind and not losing liters of blood, I don't think they would have acted like that. But being delirious and near the end, so yeah, I think, it's a good question. I don't know.
There's a whole raft of disagreement and tension between those characters, just in a historical context. So you look at that, the way that plot sort of turned out, and you're asked a lot of questions, and I guess I like the fact that it did, and I like the way that it did sort of bring the plot together. But at the same time, I'm looking at it wondering, is that entirely believable? Gee.
They'd snuggle up in a bed together.
It's a romantic ending, yeah.
The opening, the closing song, "We've only just begun," or some other, or "Endless Love." Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer. Sorry.
Oh yeah, we haven't talked about all the actors in it. Do you feel like the script gave them enough material to work with to really give you a good feeling for the characters and stuff?
What was the name of the guy posing to be the hangman? I'm sorry, no, not the bounty hunter. The guy, the Tim Roth character. He came across, when you thought he was the hangman, he came across as quite charming, as a gentleman, and then you learn he's a bad guy, and at that point he's wounded and bleeding out. I would have liked to have seen him as the gentleman bad guy. Like when Daisy's trying to talk down Mannix and the Major, he could have, tried being the voice of reason. Now let's think about this logically, gentlemen, or something like that, but was instead busy dying.
Would the plot have been served better by characters in the story being that gang of characters in the story being more divided?
Oh, you mean some tension and infighting amongst the Domergue gang?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, because they are a gang, so I think there would be infighting. But by the same token, if they show this to the bounty hunters, they're going to get their asses shot.
I feel like if everyone brought their own intention and their own story to the actual... to the room kind of thing, then it'd be more interesting to see how they play out against each other.
That would be interesting, yeah.
Essentially, what you've got at the end is you realise, it's two groups all along. It's a group of people who quite possibly just going to murder the other group as soon as they get the chance.
Interesting. No, it's a good thought, actually. Like, you can do that for Hateful 9.
I'll let Quentin Tarantino know. It's fine.
We got a great idea.
Call the sequel Hateful 8 2.
No, you'd have to go the Hot Shots route, Hateful 8 Part 2, or something like that. So one thing that was actually taking me out of the movie was that Kurt Russell kept saying, I don't trust people, they're after my bounty. Oh, what's that? You haven't heard of me? Well, I'm the hangman, and this woman's worth $10,000. Stop telling people that!
Yeah, you probably wouldn't want to telegraph that, really. But it's the kind of the way he expresses himself. He's the most honest character in the entire thing.
That is true.
You're just like, wow, this guy's an absolute ass. And yet, he's almost the good guy? Like, it's interesting.
I mean, also the thing is, like, Quentin Tarantino, famously, he worked in a video store and watched every video in the store before he went on to make his movies. So he's borrowing a lot of different tropes from other films and other stuff. So I imagine that that's sort of a well-worn sort of theme or well-worn trope in other movies is people giving too much stuff away. We talked about this with Watchmen, about how the villain doesn't tell his master stroke of a plan kind of thing. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's what he's doing, he's retreading earlier cinema there. Just a thought.
Yeah, just a thought. If you're going into a bounty hunting, don't tell people what your marks are.
You probably don't want to bring them in alive as well. They did go into that in the movie, but you didn't really feel like it's, you know, a long-lived kind of profession where you're trying to do that all the time.
Yeah, that would have been interesting to discover why he's the he's the hangman because you hang, but why does he go to so much trouble to bring him in alive?
Yeah. Like, they briefly cover it with, oh, it's not meant to be an easy job. But that doesn't answer that question of why does he take the hard route? Why does he take the road less traveled?
That might be the character. That might just be the character flaw or the kind of
Arrogance.
Yeah.
Maybe. That's an interesting point. Does he come across as arrogant? Yeah, he's arrogant.
Yeah, he does.
Bragging about how much he's... Yeah, arrogance. There you go. One of his many flaws.
I wonder if we could, hypothetically, I think you could probably go through almost all the characters and find some sort of flaw in their personality, which is ultimately their undoing. But I don't think we have time for it now. So, if you're thinking, or you're wondering whether you'd like this kind of movie, the other stuff obviously is all Quentin Tarantino's content. But there is a couple of other movies that immediately sprung to my mind as being quite relevant. The first one, and most importantly, is probably True Grit. The modern take on True Grit feels a lot like this movie. It's sort of slow moving, there are action sequences, not everything's cut and dried, and it's definitely a lot of interesting Western type characters in it. There's a lot of Western plot points and that sort of thing.
And it's got some great mumbling in it. Some excellent mumbling.
And there's another movie that I personally really enjoy. It's called Desperado. That is an Antonio Banderas movie, and it has a lot of action in it. Oh my goodness, a lot of action. But there's still a lot of interesting character interaction and that sort of stuff.
That's a movie by Quentin Tarantino, is one of his best friends in Hollywood, Robert Rodriguez, and Tarantino was a producer on that film, so no incident there as far as sort of why there's crossover.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks for joining us this week. We hope you've enjoyed yourselves as much as we have. You can catch us on the Twitter at wellplayedau. You can send us questions, comments, or abuse at wellplayedau@gmail.com. And if you like, please leave us a 5-star review. So thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.